In 1984, British Airways carried more international passengers than any other airline on Earth. Its slogan was, "The world's favorite airline." That wasn't marketing copy, it was a statistical fact. 42 years later, the airline that had invented long-haul business class was being benchmarked against Ryanair. To understand how that happened, you have to start before British Airways existed. After the Second World War, the British government built two state airlines from scratch. BOAC, the British Overseas Airways Corporation, handled intercontinental routes, North America, Africa, the Far East. BEA, British European Airways, handled Europe and domestic. Neither had to compete. Fares were set in Whitehall, routes were government allocated. If you wanted to fly from London to New York in 1960, there was one choice. Britain ran its airlines the way it ran its coal mines, not businesses. In May 1952, BOAC put the world's first commercial jet airliner into service, the de Havilland Comet. It flew higher and faster than any propeller aircraft alive. For 2 years, Britain led the world in commercial aviation. Then the Comet started falling out of the sky. 3 crashes in 13 months. Investigators traced the cause to metal fatigue around the aircraft's square windows. Each pressurization cycle drove invisible cracks deeper into the corners until the structure gave way. The fleet was grounded. Boeing used those 18 months to finish the 707. By the time Britain returned the Comet to service, the Americans were delivering jets to every major carrier on the planet. Britain never recovered its position. What followed was 20 years of decline. BOAC commissioned British manufacturers to build aircraft to its specifications, then ordered American jets instead. The VC-110, a 4-engine jet built for BOAC's short, hot runways in Africa and the Middle East, found almost no export customers. Vickers director George Edwards put it plainly: Britain had handed to the Americans, without a struggle, the entire world market for big jet airliners. In 1974, the government merged BOAC, BEA, and 2 regional carriers into a single entity called British Airways. The International Air Transport Association that same year ranked it as an airline passengers should avoid: long queues, poor service, chronic industrial disputes. British Airways was losing money, and nobody inside had any reason to fix it because there was no competition to lose passengers to. That changed in 1981. Margaret Thatcher appointed Lord King as chairman with one instruction: prepare it for privatization. King cut the workforce from 52,000 to 35,000 in 2 years. In 1983, he brought in Colin Marshall as chief executive. Marshall's diagnosis was that the airline's culture was built around operations, not customers. He launched the program called Putting People First and put every employee through it. Saatchi & Saatchi built a campaign around one provable fact: British Airways carried more international passengers than any other airline on Earth. The slogan was "The world's favorite airline." They ran it for 18 years. In February 1987, the government sold British Airways to the public, raising $900 million. Within 3 years, British Airways was the most profitable airline in the world. It flew Concorde, the supersonic passenger jet that crossed the Atlantic in under 3 hours on routes to New York, Washington, and Barbados, with just 7 aircraft, generating between $30 and $60 million in annual profit. It launched Club World in 1988, a long-haul business-class cabin with fully flat beds that redefined what flying at the front of a 747 could feel like. In 1991, when the Gulf War collapsed air travel demand by 30%, British Airways gave away every single seat on every international flight on one day, around 50,000 tickets, and recovered passenger numbers within 120 days. That was the peak. The slide started in the same year the share offering closed. Virgin Atlantic, launched in 1984 with a single Boeing 747 on the Gatwick to New York route, was winning passengers on British Airways' most profitable transatlantic corridors, with business class that matched British Airways and fares that undercut it. British Airways' response was not to compete fairly. In 1990, the airline created a covert intelligence unit at Gatwick tasked with undermining Virgin. British Airways staff hacked into Virgin's computer systems, accessed passenger booking data, called those passengers while impersonating Virgin employees, told them their flights had been canceled, and redirected them onto British Airways flights. In January 1993, the case went to court. Virgin won $3.51 million, the largest defamation settlement in UK legal history. British Airways issued a public apology. Lord King resigned. Branson distributed the damages among Virgin staff and called it the British Airways bonus. Then came the threat British Airways had not seen coming. EasyJet launched in 1995 with no meals, no assigned seats, and online booking at a time when most tickets were sold through travel agents. Ryanair restructured on the Southwest Airlines model, secondary airports, 25-minute turnarounds, stripped back fares, and by 1996 had overtaken British Airways on the London to Dublin route. By the early 2000s, both carriers were pulling passengers off British Airways' European network faster than British Airways could cut costs to match. British Airways launched its own budget subsidiary called Go in 1998, sold it to a management buyout in 2001, which sold it to EasyJet in 2002. British Airways had incubated a direct competitor, handed it to its largest rival, and collected nothing. The cost-cutting era that followed dismantled everything Marshall had built. Willie Walsh, chief executive from 2005, announced major budget reductions in 2008. In 2011, British Airways merged with Spain's Iberia to form IAG, International Airlines Group, a holding company registered in Madrid. Walsh's successor was Alex Cruz, who came from Vueling, a Spanish budget airline. Short-haul meal service went, seat pitch was reduced, free checked baggage disappeared, and on March 27, 2008, British Airways opened Terminal 5 at Heathrow, a $4.3 billion terminal, 5 years in construction, with the tagline, "So calm, you'll simply flow through." On opening day, staff could not get through security. The baggage system failed. More than 28,000 bags were separated from their passengers. Around 500 flights were canceled. It took 3 weeks to return most of them. Around British Airways, the rest of the UK airline industry was ending. Monarch Airlines went into administration in October 2017, the largest airline failure in UK history, 110,000 passengers stranded abroad. Thomas Cook Airlines collapsed in September 2019, 178 years of history, 19 million annual passengers, unable to secure $200 million against $1.7 billion in debt. Flybe, Europe's largest independent regional airline, over 200 routes connecting UK cities no other carrier served, grounded all flights in March 2020, when coronavirus collapsed bookings and the government withdrew its rescue package. 3 major UK carriers in 36 months. British Airways lost $6.9 billion in 2020. It cut 12,000 jobs. It accepted government-backed loans. The airline that had given away 50,000 seats in 1991 to restart demand needed to be rescued itself. The slogan, "The world's favorite airline," ran from 1983 to 2001. British Airways dropped it quietly. Today, Ryanair carries more passengers across Europe than any other airline. EasyJet is the second largest carrier in the UK by passengers. British Airways is third. The airline that built the standard every other carrier measured itself against spent 20 years making decisions that moved it closer to the airlines that had disrupted it, and further from the airline it had been. The rise was real. The turnaround under King and Marshall was one of the most significant corporate transformations in aviation history. The fall was just as real, and the distance between them is not a mystery. It is a sequence of decisions, each one with its own logic, each one moving in the same direction.